Hello, everybody. Welcome to This Week in Innovation. I'm Jeff Roster, former Gartner and IHL retail sector analyst, now serving on several advisory boards, and most recently joining the Advisory Council for the Center for Retail Transformation at George Mason University. I'm here with my podcast partner, Brian Sathianathan, co-founder of Iterate.ai and a veteran of several successful exits. Today's subject matter is how artificial intelligence is about to have a major impact on improving safety in stores and malls. For today's discussion, Solomon Ray, Director of Innovation at Iterate.ai, joins us to offer his insights. Give it a listen. Hey, Brian and Solomon, how you doing today?
Doing great, Jeff. How are you?
Outstanding. So today we're going to talk about artificial intelligence and the role that AI is going to play in retail. But Brian, I think you want to take it a little different direction today. What do you want to focus on? Because that's an awfully big subject, AI.
Absolutely, Jeff. So, in this series of the 5 forces of innovation, AI is a very powerful horizontal force that's, as we've mentioned previously, it's across every organization, every department, right? And most of you leaders, you guys are pretty aware of what are the traditional cases that you can do with AI, like recommendations and systems to do inventory and system to do predictions and people counting and so on and so forth. But today we are going to talk about a different topic, right? Especially, Jeff, what happens is, with all the shootings that we are seeing today in the United States and many different types of incidents, it's very important for retail leaders and CEOs, right? This is the question they are going to get asked at the board level, right? What is your precautions, or what are your methodologies? What is your protection process? King Super, right? Lone shooter. So retailers as well as restaurant owners and various public businesses that have public presence has to think about how do we ensure the safety of our shoppers? How do we protect and provide better safety? So today we're going to talk about AI-driven safety.
Now, so Brian, is safety a subcategory of loss prevention, or is it the other way around? Who ultimately owns that? Is that VP Store Operations, or is that still in LP? How do you see that, where that all sits?
No, I think this is an area that will be owned by VP of Store Operations primarily, right? It may be considered as a part of LPS from a budget perspective, but I think this is something that will go all the way to the very senior leadership, CEO, or even the board level, right? Because just like any other things like, having conscious and social responsibility, this is something that a company's senior leadership and board has to be very conscious of, right? Because essentially these are the set of questions the board and the company has to answer. Have you taken the right precautions to protect your shoppers, right? Just like if you would have a ransomware attack or an information security breach, right? CIOs get asked every day, right? What are your precautions? What are your disaster recovery methodologies? What are your data protection methodologies? How do you actually ensure business continuity, right? So shopper safety, I think, is going to be a hot topic that's going to be in the discussion on several boards and at several senior leadership level.
Jeff, you kind of touched upon a very interesting topic here, because we're kind of discussing the subject about safety, customer experiences, and security, which probably right now isn't quite defined about responsibilities. And I think for retailers are really, really good at quantifying things such as loss prevention and theft. So for example, pre-COVID, according to the NRF, retailers lost due to theft, fraud, and other causes was $62 billion in 2019. And in 2018, it was $51 billion. So post-COVID, we're kind of moving out of the pandemic. Maybe that's going to tick up a little bit more. We also know the numbers for the average robbery, which is $830 in losses last year. So according to this survey, so that was 2018. So we know all these numbers, but what we're talking about specifically is what are these effects that are not so quantifiable? Like if you have a store that's kind of deemed unsafe where customers don't want to go, or your store associates can't do anything about people are being aggressive or stealing things, that sort of thing. That's what we want to talk about in some of the solutions in AI.
Wow, very interesting. So, Brian, where is AI adoption from a safety perspective in retail right now? I got to think we're at the earliest stages, maybe not even adopted, just at the early stages of creation, or where do you see this right now?
See, I think what has happened is in other industries, right? This sort of safety, AI-powered safety of recognizing shooters, recognizing people wearing masks, people acting in a suspicious manner, carrying weapons, open carry, all those things can be detected through cameras that are outside the store, right? In other industries, this type of thing has been there for a while, for the last couple of years. There are quite a few startups and technology companies implementing this type of technologies. Even at Iterate, we've also trained our AI models on top of Interplay to do something like this. But I think in retail, I think retail is still at a place where this problem is being recognized. But what happens is once a recognition and the acceptance that this is a problem, they have to move very fast, right? So I think I would say this is at a very early stage, but nevertheless, to use AI and solve or address problems like this is already there, right? It's practical today. This is not this is not a research problem. This is a problem that is practical, and this is one of the things that you call as applied AI solutions, right? This is all AI being applied across these use cases.
What's interesting about that, Brian, is I've never, being a retail analyst, I've never really spent a lot of time around loss prevention. I mean, I always kind of consider it pretty horizontal, very important, but not necessarily something that was really retail specific. But it sounds like when you add in AI, there's a lot of retail specific processes. So we're talking about probably a horizontal piece of software capability or technology that's going to verticalize pretty quickly. What does that look like?
No, that's a great question, Jeff. I think it is this whole idea of safety, right? AI-powered safety using image recognitions and camera and video, right? Is a horizontal capability, right? It's originally been used in military, but then it's been migrated to other industries. But excuse me, you're going to see this heavily being used to provide safety for shoppers, right? And it can be verticalized, right? One of the things I think why we did this session today about this given topic, opposed to several generalized AI use cases, right? Autonomous shopping and so on and so forth, is because I think this is a topic that's going to start unfolding very quickly, right? And I think retailers and leaders have to be ready for it, right? So that's one of the reasons we've been kind of bringing this topic in and kind of talking through this. It is going to be verticalized very quickly, right? Because like the use cases like, identifying suspicious behaviors, right, in parking lots, in retail parking lots, identifying theft in various, retail parking lots where there's a lot of camera, right? Identifying open carry, right? Or identifying assault, right? By doing all these things, you're providing a vehicle and an open paradigm for safety and security. So, for example, you have an open carry, somebody's actually carrying a gun, trying to enter your store, and if there is suspicious behavior, you could actually lock the doors, right? You could actually connect this to your network operations center and create duress calls and other things, right? How do you ensure the safety of your shoppers? How do you create a better environment, a secure environment for your shoppers, right? If you look at the traditional, safety, robbery detection, theft detection type capabilities are essentially targeted towards protecting goods, right? It's always been tied towards an LPS world, right? It's sort of the kind of the next generation after putting tags, after doing some level of camera security, identifying who is either doing a sweetheart deal or who is basically shoplifting. This is sort of the next generation, right? But I'm not really worried about the theft aspect of it. This is not just about revenue, right? I'm thinking more about how do you create safety and comfort to your shoppers. That's why this is a board level, senior executive level, a very senior leadership problem, right? Because when I shop on Mr. Bezos' store, sitting at the comfort of my home, I have no worries of getting shot, right? But if I'm in downtown in a store, can my safety be guaranteed, right? When I'm in a strip mall, when I'm in a shopping mall, can that safety be guaranteed, right? So these are the type of things I think where advanced technologies like AI can help you significantly, help retailers significantly.
Yeah, what's really interesting about that, Brian, is I just went down today down to our downtown and shopped two grocers. You never want to say what day it is when you're doing a podcast, but for this point, I'll have to fess up. So today's the first day in California that masks were optional, and so I wanted to see what the response was. And he walked in and two very, very good, high quality grocers, and the checkout experience was terrible because instead of that personal experience that you and I both grew up with. Of friendly interactions, something I really enjoyed, even being a tech analyst and even be somebody that has covered self-checkout. I mean, I personally like to go stand in lines because I like to listen to people and I like to interact. And I just thought today, wow, what a terrible experience this is. Plexiglass, at least we got our masks off. And I'm thinking, I could really now begin to see the push towards self-checkout even more so because it's literally actually more labor to check or more of my labor to check out at a checkout than it is to go self-checkout because I have to bag my own stuff and all that good stuff. And so that's just a post-COVID world. And now we, unfortunately, we keep reading more and more about acts of violence, and anybody that's just watched the Twitter feed coming out of San Francisco and what's happening with retail in San Francisco and probably other national or major cities, there's a lot of what you just described. And so I think there's an awful lot of emphasis on what you're talking about. So it's going to be an area I think that we're going to see some pretty interesting and quick uptake in.
I have a really good friend who lives up in San Francisco, and we kind of jokingly call a particular Safeway up there the Stab Way, because it's located in a very seedy area. And we would actually go there and we go late nights and do some quick shopping, buy some ice cream, whatever. But because of that reputation, where they can't really control people coming in, stealing things, or getting in fights, the store associates won't get involved. We talked about the theft, the robbery part of it, the loss prevention. But again, we're talking more, this later conversation here is more the customer experience, just as you described, Jeff. So what's the effect of that? The stab way, so to speak. Do people want to go if this continues on, or the stores just really can't do anything about it? And when we talk about AI in technology in a broader sense, we talk a lot about scaling, and we know that obviously a lot of e-commerce, there's a lot of capability to scale really fast. So that's what we see a lot of potential with AI and using a lot of these advanced algorithms to detect suspicious behaviors or people with weapons and want to do things. That helps you look at things from a broader spectrum, and you can identify certain objects, whether it's weapons or full facial cover masks, and kind of automate the system so that you don't have to rely on individual or security officers to ensure the safety of a particular store.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. So for us that are just getting up to speed with AI, we talk about training, or actually you did even today, talk about training the AI model. If I'm training the AI model for what you're talking about, Brian, from a safety perspective, is it the same training that we would use in loss prevention, or is it the same system, same training, or are those separate trainings?
No, I think, Jeff, for this type of an environment, you have to do a lot more extensive training, and I'll have Solomon kind of unpack a few things for us. But at a higher level, right, the training has to involve number of different active scenarios, right? One of such scenarios is basically the traditional robbery, masked robberies, right? Armed robberies of people entering stores or trying to enter stores or threatening the people, the counter, the checkout staff, right? So that's one type of a scenario. The other one is very much detecting pre-robbery cases, like suspicious behaviors in parking lots, right? People acting in a certain way, right? Or other shoppers getting assaulted in various areas, in parking lots or in the near vicinities of the stores, right? Because these are the type of things that where you can create and do early prevention, right? The best way to think about this is, think about, if you are a chief information officer of a retailer, right? You are looking at, your networks, right? Traffic coming into your retail store. I mean, digital traffic, not of course the physical traffic. You're looking at the digital traffic, bits and bytes, right? You're looking for your firewalls are preventing, the bad people from getting in, right? And you have security mechanisms in place. You have disaster recovery mechanisms in place. In case something goes down, how do you recover? You have business continuity plans in place to take care of this thing, right? But a lot of those digital equivalents don't actually translate very well to a physical world, right? What I mean by that is if you suddenly have an active shooter in your store, how do you respond, right? I mean, of course, they have some emergency procedures and duress calls and everything is there. Some high-level procedures are there, right? But this is the world that the brands and retailers actually don't know yet, right? There is so much to be learned here, right? So that's where AI comes in, because AI could all the way from, and before a threat forms into becoming a threat, it could detect the threat. It could help you mitigate the threat, right? And if it's caught at the right times, you could actually save numerous, human lives, right? So that's why I think this gets interesting. That's why this is a much bigger, broader conversation than traditional theft prevention, because theft prevention in grand scheme of things is very small, and it's also considered sort of a cost line item in the retail budget, right? Compared to this is actually a confidence gaining, an assurance item, right? Because if you create the right confidence to your shoppers, they will come. And Solomon, can you also start unpacking a little bit in terms of the different set of use cases? Can you talk to us about, what are the type of cases as you are looking at this problem? How are you breaking down the cases? How are you thinking about it?
Yeah, sure thing, Brian. So the way we're looking at it, and when I say we, I'm working with one of our AI teams here at Iterate to create these object detections to train our AI algorithms using security footage. And we're looking at it more so from a software solution, meaning where a lot of the footage we're looking at comes from CCTVs or like different footage. We're not depending on any complicated cameras, thermal imaging, stuff like that. That could be another use case. And the reason why is because for things such as concealed weapons, you're very limited if you're using a traditional camera. And so what we want to do is to be able to do an object detection as well as possible, so you don't have a huge lag in the object. So meaning that when we look at weapons, and we classify weapons as either a pistol, rifle, even knife, and then so we're doing a lot of object getting data footage for different types of rifles, pistols, and knives to be able to detect it. And we're looking in the context of you have just the weapons itself. You have a weapon with a armed suspect. You can potentially an armed suspect with multiple weapons, a suspect within a crowd, and then even multiple suspects with multiple weapons. So we want to capture all these different test cases for our system, so that if we're not able to detect something, we can kind of trace it back and say, oh, where did the algorithm fail? Is it because the training for the weapon itself is very weak, so we need to straighten that? Or is it because once somebody's concealing a weapon and it makes it very, very hard to detect it, so we have to have more examples to do so, to identify partially concealed weapons when somebody's potentially drawing a pistol? Or it could be just within a crowd, it's very, very hard for the system to detect all that noise as in like people, regular customers who are not unarmed, from somebody who potentially is armed. So these are kind of like the thought process we're taking to examine it, to train our data. And then we also, in addition to weapons, we're looking at masks, both kind of the surgical masks that were commonplace during the pandemic, and also full face coverings. And the reason for this is some retailers do want to look at people wearing masks for their protocols within the store, but also pre-COVID, we did kind of come across a use case where a lot of thefts and robberies didn't involve a weapon itself. And what happens is somebody might be outdoors, and so an outdoor security camera might capture something going on in the parking lot where somebody is fully masked, like a full face covering, and then walks into the store, and then that person just tells the store associate, cashier, I have a weapon, give me all the money in the cash register, and that's it. So there's actually not even a gun that's being pulled out, and it's just the threat of it. So there's cases like that where there's no explicit weapon, there's a threat of a weapon, but from the footage, you have to kind of gain clues to what kind of pattern that this might happen. So in that case, is it somebody who's kind of staking the outside of a store? Is it somebody who's wearing full face covering? And then so we do a lot of training for that to kind of say, like, what are the patterns that would identify a high risk of some a nefarious person who's going to rob a store or do something or potentially have a weapon before that actually happens.
Wow, that's really interesting. Curious, I'm doing more and more, or bumping into voice more and more. Definitely in Clubhouse, there's a couple of really big groups around voice, and I'm reading more and more. Is there a component that the AI would be listening, I don't know, maybe around checkouts or wherever their money is, for keywords like, give me your money, or I've got a gun, or something like that? Is that even in the works, or is that still too far out?
No, I think that's a good question, Jeff. At this point, because of the placement of the cameras and the various distance and the noise level, voice at this point, we haven't really looked at voice, because just by looking at visual data alone, there is so much we can capture, right? And then, like Solomon mentioned, I think in the very early part, is that by looking at non-visual data, like radio data and other types of data, you can even capture further through various forms of sensors, right? Based on motion and all that stuff. So I think that's kind of the place where you can passively be there and begin to capture, opposed to disrupting any privacy or actual people conversation and listening on conversations and things like that. But we will not discount voice in the future. There could be scenarios, right, as directional microphones become more pervasive and cheaper, right, to put in these locations.
So the system you're talking about is probably a rip and replace. I would assume the systems in place today aren't that a retailer's purchased aren't ready to handle this kind of generational jump. So we're talking about new systems basically from the start, new cameras also.
No, I think the way we are thinking about it is to work within what the retailers have in their current ecosystems. But I think if you look at most of the retailers, they are going through some sort of a traditional, a planned upgrade phase, right? Because most of the cameras that's been put several years ago, and they themselves lack a lot of resolution and some basic operational functionality, right? So like several retailers that we've spoken to are going through a natural upgrade phase. I mean, it has nothing to do with the weapons or the theft or the robbery detection, right? As that happens, we want to take advantage of the type of cameras that are already there, right? Because the bar to enter and begin to even provide in a world where this type of safety and security is not even existent, to provide something that's a notch or two higher itself is a great start, right? So we can work with our goal is to we've done a lot of work to optimize the system to begin to work with what's out there, right? To take feeds from existing camera sets, right? That's what we've been working on. But then for, if you think about such solutions for, much smaller footprint businesses, it might be cheaper to just like put in one or two cameras in the entrances that are completely, wireless based and IP based and 3G based, that can make this much more seamless, right? But for retailers who already have spent and made investments, we want to leverage what's out there and not sort of reinvent the wheel.
Well, that's probably good news. But what I'm hearing from you is if I'm in the forecast business, I probably ought to be setting aside a fairly significant growth rate out maybe 2 or 3 years for this type of software, LP or safety software.
I bet you, Jeff. Absolutely. You're spot on. Yes. I would even call it safety software.
Safety software.
The problem is, I think the LP, the moment you put it into an LP bucket, I think what happens is you're not thinking, I mean, not you in the sense that, the leader will not be thinking about it correctly, right? But once you put in the safety bucket, this is more, because the best example there are two analogies I would draw, right? Because this is not a big problem today, right? But this is coming because sometimes we don't always look at today's problems, right? In our session, sometimes, Jeff, we talk about where the puck is going, right? This is one of those problems of where the puck is going, right? In the future. So there are two areas I would look at. One is, look at what's happening in the traditional IT world, information security world, right? The precautions that are taken in the digital world, the information security world. There is no equivalent when it comes to translating into physical security, right? So that's one. The other is that, look at companies like Apple, right? Like security and data privacy used to be a problem, or like is a cost item, right? A line item in most organizations, right? But look how Apple turned it around, right? They're basically selling privacy today, right? They're basically saying, like, we are the best operating system, the best device, the best phone that keeps your information private, right? Today, if you share a photo from your iPhone with me, your geolocation from the photo is stripped out, right? The Messenger app is doing it automatically, right?
Well, look at the latest Apple commercials. They're emphasizing data privacy and protection.
Absolutely, Solomon, spot on, right? So that's one of the things, because as retail brand, what if you are the most safest place to go shop? And that's comfort and that's security. And I mean, I bet you American shoppers will pay for it.
Okay, so probably by next year, maybe not this upcoming year, but by next year, there'll be a whole row at NRF in New York for AI-assisted loss not loss prevention, but safety. So you're lobbying for a whole separate new category.
I am. We are. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of leaders who feel the same way, right? And also, if there is not a row, at least there is a good panel discussion at a minimum.
We see it in the software space, or the startup space, excuse me. So startups who specialize AI detection for threat prevention, weapons detection, and we're seeing a lot of growth into that. And even one of the startups that we've been talking to, they recently got acquired. So even from a VC's point of view, they know this is a growing section and opportunity.
Interesting. So for all my fellow my fellow still working analyst, heads up, you got a new category you might have to be thinking about if the folks at Iterate are successful in driving this. Brian, what are some of the things that retail executives need to be doing today thinking about this? I mean, obviously, safety is in the news on a daily basis, and so we're now becoming more and more concerned about the level of violence in cities. Every day, even in the Wall Street Journal, I'm reading stories about this. So I don't know that you could get much more attention around the potential threat. I guess now so the problem is being made aware. We're all of us are aware of the problem. So now, what's the next steps? What are you advising your clients to do? How do they start on this process?
It's a wonderful question, Jeff, because in this show, one of the things you and I and Solomon and all of our guests, right? One of the things we always talk about is the advice is great, but what do the leader do on Monday, right? What do you do on Monday, right? So I think there are a couple of things you could think about. One is if you're a senior leader, or you're a board member, or an operating executive in a company, first is to get yourself aware of the issue, right? So read up, like Jeff said, there's so much of content that's out there, and learn about it. Number one, I think knowledge will sort of help you understand the nuances underneath it. Second, I think, is to see how much of it is a problem in your given store, your structure. It all depends on store size, shopper velocity, right? Neighborhoods where your stores are located, all that stuff, right? So look at how much of the problem is applicable to your store. I think number three is to talk to your senior leadership, especially the VP store operation, the loss prevention folks, your CIO, right? What is the equivalent mechanism that you have in place today? Ask all the right questions, right? Because as a leader, one of the things in this space what you want to do is sort of take the unknown, right? We call this philosophy, right? When you don't know what do you want to do and how to do it, you sort of call it the unknown, and convert it to sort of an unknown known or a known unknown, right? At least understand the problem and know what you have today, and figure out what sort of mechanism that you would put in place. And I think it's important to have that conversation. Step three, it's important to have an honest conversation with your leadership and not wait till it becomes an exacerbated problem and this happens in your store. And then it's too late by that time, right? So I would take those 3 steps.
Interesting. One final question you just happen to think of. As you and I spend more time on Clubhouse, I'm spending a lot more time in the mall owners' rooms, retail real estate. Typically, loss prevention, I know this is far broader category, but loss prevention was inside the store, so a store inside a mall could do their own thing. But we're really now talking about pushing out into the parking lots, into the common spaces. So I don't know. Is this something that mall owners and landlords are really going to have to take on more so than a independent retailer or an individual retailer?
I think it's both, right? Depending on how the retailers are. I mean, like one of the things that you've seen is that retailers who are located in strip malls and like in individual large spaces, right, non-mall spaces, have been pretty successful, right, driving traffic, right, because they can get very differentiated traffic, right, and they convert well. So depending on how you are located, inside a very large mall or in a small strip mall or in your own location, right? So it depends on where your stores are located and how they are distributed. But I think this might also be a value creation opportunity for mall owners, right? The mall owners typically are trying to help drive traffic to retailer, right? Because they can charge the retailer based on the amount of traffic that they can drive into the mall, right? But what's interesting is driving traffic, safety and security becomes another equation of driving traffic, right? Because people are more likely to go to a place where they feel safe, right? And if they have the right precautions, especially with like COVID, right? I mean, like malls that basically, openly provide hand sanitizers, places where they have better safety precautions and, places where they have COVID testing enabled centers in the malls, right? People are going towards those locations, right? Just because the sheer nature of what people want to see, right? So I think this is an opportunity. I would say it's a great opportunity for mall owners.
And from a technology standpoint, don't forget that data and AI are connected. So for a mall operator, if you can get that data across your different stores outside of your facilities, that's going to give more data for whatever system you want to implement to train it. And that will benefit all your stores in your malls to operate better, instead of each individual store creating their own loss prevention system, AI system, in their own footage. So there's a lot of advantages to gather all this data and work collaboratively among all stakeholders.
Wow. Well, that's probably a pretty good place to end it. As usual, very interesting. I walk away with yet more to-dos, create a whole new category for software spend, which is really easy to do. Rewrite all our survey documents around loss prevention, add a new category. So interesting times. And I really love the idea of looking at the startup world to see what the next iteration of software is. That's actually really cool. So that's something that I don't think any analyst is really even thinking about. So Brian, Solomon, thanks as always, and we'll catch up with you in a couple days.
Thank you, Jeff. As always, it's fun talking to you.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much, Jeff.
Thanks for tuning into today's episode. For more info, refer to the pod notes below. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider giving us a 5-star rating and review. It really helps us grow. I'm your host, Jeff Roster, analyst at large. If you want to connect, follow us on Twitter at JeffPR or at Brian Sathianathan, or connect with us on LinkedIn. Visit my website at roster.retail.com or Brian's at Iterate.ai. Until next time, stay safe and have a great week.